Hello and welcome back around the bonfire. It is a joy to have you for the show that is here to remind you he's Brian Gutierrez, dude. That's who he is. That's his name. Say it a few more times for me. We are here on a victory Sunday as Chicago Fire took down the vaunted Charlotte FC, led by, of course, Wilfried Zaha, 4-1 in Charlotte last night. I'm joined by the best in the business, as always. Tim, how's your Sunday?
Sunday's good. The weather is nice. The winds are flowing. And I don't think many people in that locker room would agree with the assessment that the team is led by Wilfried Zaha. I don't think that Wilfried Zaha is leading anyone, possibly including Wilfried Zaha at the moment.
Wow, they lose one game and it's all his fault, Tim. Gosh. DJ,
they haven't lost one game. Yeah. But yeah, he's definitely got a bit of a persecution complex there too.
DJ is here as well. DJ, how's your day starting? And actually, hey, this is the first time that the podcast has outnumbered Florida to Illinois. 2 people in Florida today, 1 person in Illinois. DJ, how are you feeling, brother?
I am no longer the most southern of us. This is very excellent.
Hey, man, I really am DJ. Yeah, I'm in Florida and I ate some pizza today. So I really am DJ right now. But as mentioned before,
it's not truly DJ, though, until you see a gator.
That's true, man. I haven't seen a gator since I got down here, and I'm leaving tomorrow morning, which means I probably won't. But
do we count alums of the University of Florida?
We don't really rock. This is Miami, Tim. We don't really rock with Florida like that.
Yeah, that's way too far south for that.
But anywho, it's a pleasure to have everyone here. It's a wonderful day. Chicago Fire, their second victory in a row. I think it's the first time we've strung multiple together since that wonderful 3-game winning streak we saw early in the year. Led, as I mentioned before, on the back and the leg and I don't know, maybe the brain of Brian Gutierrez. A wonderful performance, 2 goals, 1 assist to bring home the man of the match title and hopefully player of the week. But we'll see about that. We do have a little bit of news to hop into before we talk a little bit more about the game itself. Nothing too crazy. Just want to give a quick injury update that we missed on the preview show for this week. We did have Chase Gasper and Leonardo Barroso returning to training this week. Gasper has been dealing on and off with injuries for the last year or so exciting to see him back with the team, bolstering up the fullback depth a little more in a room that is, I think, definitely more crowded than when he entered it, I would say. And we're obviously hoping to get Leonardo Barroso back as soon as possible. We saw the type of player he can be. We also saw David Pareba, Chris Mueller, and Carlos Tehran rehabbing outside. From the conversations we've kind of had, sounds like timeline for all of them still the same, nothing new, but taking advantage of the fact that the weather in Chicago has finally turned. But hopefully we get to see those guys back on the pitch soon. DJ, anything you want to add to our injury talks before we kick into the game here?
I think that the one thing to say is that the timeline we were given for Chris Mueller by Greg Berhalter a couple of weeks ago was that it was going to be weeks, not months. So, a couple of weeks later, we don't really know. I'd expect him to train for at least the better part or the entirety of a week before he would be considered for a game situation. And probably we've seen Greg being willing to ease guys in off the bench before throwing them into a starting lineup. Not that I necessarily think that just with the way the team is playing, that would be in the cards for Mueller right now anyways, unless he was potentially available for a cup game, which is not going to happen because the Fire's next cup game is Tuesday, and then there's not one until July. So, it's where we are.
Absolutely. And obviously, exciting news I think on the Chris Mueller front was seeing him listed as questionable this week. Obviously, what he does in training tells you more than his roster designation, I think. But it was great to see him moved off that completely out or inactive list. And so you never know. Maybe this is the week where we finally get some full training and we can see him get some run next Saturday. But there are more pressing things to discuss. Those more pressing things being Greg Berhalter's Chicago Fire putting 4 goals in the back of the net against an Eastern Conference opponent. As mentioned before, Brian Gutierrez was the man of the day, scored early, had an assist, and then converted the penalty that kind of iced the game. Jonathan Bamba scoring a golazo from outside the box, on which Kalina kind of made himself look a little foolish. I think he might have gotten a little help in that sense, but a wonderful shot from him. And then Philip Zinkernagel converting a chance from inside the box after a really beautiful delivery from Andrew Gutman. Charlotte did claw one back, but it was never really close after the Fire got going in a game where, from the outside view, I would say they dominated. Tim, I'll kind of kick to you in terms of your general thoughts on the performance and how they stacked up last night.
In my 5 things on the match that's out now in Red 97, I called it the most dominant performance that we've seen so far from the Fire. I think the one other possibility would be that game in Vancouver, but that was a little bit of a different game just in terms of how it felt. And in that game, the Fire actually had to, come back. So this is different in that they got a lead, took a little while to get it, and they never really looked back. And it felt even before they had that goal that the goal was coming. And it's a good thing to see, I think, a complete performance. You talked about Brian Gutierrez. I think he is one of the stories of this game, not just because of what he did with the brace and setting up Bamba's opening goal, but also because he was getting back and really putting in some stuff defensively, which is something that I did not know was physically possible before the start of this season.
It's funny you say physically possible. In my head, I felt like it was always physically possible. It was just if he wanted to do it and if he had the
I think it's
the
one of
will.
those things like magnets where, like, sure, you feel like you can shove 2 magnets together, pushing them in the wrong way, but like the closer they get, the harder it is. And they end up like sliding on you and stuff like that. Like him going back on defense, like there was some invisible force field that just would have prevented it from happening.
To that point, we love to see it.
I still find it funny talking about Guti that yesterday was his first assist of the MLS season.
That can't be right.
Yep.
And we're including MLS assists in that, by the way. So he's got double the chances that he does in most other leagues for that. But, I think that says a little bit about the way that he has been used a little bit differently. And the fact, not just in terms of like him being asked to finish chances, because that was the case last year, right? Where he kind of like flipped his goal scoring and assist production with the team, but also because he's been playing a lot more as a deeper lying midfielder. So he is not going to be the guy that gets the final passes often. He's going to be the guy that gets the ball into, say, like Philip Zinkernagel, who then gets the final pass, or to, Joe Bamba, who gets the final pass. And those are the guys that are more likely to be getting the assists, the way that the team is playing this year.
Yeah, certainly seeing him playing more of a traditional midfield role as opposed to that more 10 attacking midfielder type of role. Kind of an interesting point. And DJ, this is where maybe not today, but we can talk about it when we do our, preview recap for later in the week. Fire have 4 players with 6 goal contributions on the year. And part of me wonders if we had that many last year in total, and we are sitting here in May. So Philip Zinkernagel, Jonathan Bamba, Hugo Kuipers, and Brian Gutierrez, all with 6 or more. Andrew Gutman has 4. Jack Elliott added another 2, and then obviously Romani Kwame, Leonardo Barroso have chipped in as well. We also, Tim, to your point, just in terms of the way the Fire held control, there were opportunities for this game to go to 5, 6, 7, 1. Hugo Kuipers himself probably missed 2 or 3 chances that could have been converted. So even on a day where the Fire controlled from start to finish, it seemed like there could have been more. You hear coaches say, the best way to win is a close win because there's a lot to coach after the fact. Kind of like the idea of a 4-1 that could have been 6-1. And hey, we're going to work on our finishing this week too.
I want to add on. I just did the research, aka I looked at the Wikipedia article I made, and the answer is there were more last year by like 2, only because Fabian Herbers had a ton of assists.
Didn't last year? Well, if we're talking primary assists only, not counting MLS assists, it was only 2. It was Hugo Kuipers had 2 assists and 10 goals, so that's 12, and Brian Gutierrez had 6 goals and 3 assists, so that's 9, and nobody else was above 8. Fabian and Marin Highlights last I had 7 each, and Kellen Acosta was next at 5. It's just a different thing, So like one of the things I had in my 5 things, and this is like a thing that I didn't even really think to start tracking for this year until just like a couple weeks ago, because it felt like we were getting close. The Fire, by my count, and I'll update on social media when I get official confirmation from the stats people about this, but have spent more time holding the lead in 2025 than they did for all of 2024 by 5 minutes. So, I think that says something. It's quantifiably more fun to be watching this team because they get the lead more often. They give it up less often. And they have just been more fun to watch on both sides of the ball. Even when they're not leading, they're fun a lot of the time because they've been getting those chances. But it's great to not be in a hole, right? It's great to not feel like, oh my God, can they do two amazing things and end up with a draw here? It's a lot better to feel like, can they get the next goal? Can this guy get a brace? Can this person get a hat trick?
While we're on the topic of useless statistics, you want the other one that's interesting about this 3-0 win, or about the 3-goal win?
Sure.
This is the 66th minimum 3-goal victory in Chicago Fire history. It's Greg's second. You know who the top two are with the most 3-goal wins in terms of managers?
Was one
Dave
of them Greg
Sarachan
Berhalter?
Nope. Bob Bradley has 17. With 18, it's Paunovic.
Wow.
Interesting. I would have guessed Sarachan would have been second and Bob Bradley would have been first, but okay.
Sarachan is below Klopas, and I believe he's basically tied with Wiki.
Interesting.
What's the other game we won by 3? Anyway.
Detroit.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So non-league games.
Counting Open Cup,
sense.
yeah. If we don't count Open Cup, it's an even worse look for Bradley because he has, I think, 2 less than Bono.
Well, it is not the time to talk Open Cup. We will get to that a little bit later on here. We're going to start kind of a little bit more focused here, talking about the attack. After we've been talking for weeks and weeks and weeks about how the Fire refused to get off on the right foot, the attack looked slow and sluggish. We saw Bomber and Zenkenagel and Kuipers really the whole game, even with the lack of conversion, kind of controlling the flow, especially in that final third. I thought this was maybe one of the better performances we've seen just in terms of the Berhalter system working the way you would expect it to, right? Even interestingly enough, with Jonathan Dean on the field and not a more attacking prowess fullback. So, Tim, I'll kind of toss to you. Do you see this more as a product of the players are feeling comfortable and confident, things are moving in the right direction, or God love him, Tim Ream is 49 years old and the game might have left him?
Yeah. I mean, Tim Ream's been suffering, right? Like, and that's true. I think Christian Kalina has been a talisman. He was the goalkeeper of the year in the league last year. He has been excellent for them throughout Charlotte's entire existence. And this year he looks like a fine goalie in the league, which is what I said, going into this, and that's still true. I think that's part of it. Like you talked about how he could have maybe made a better decision on the Fire's opening goal. And even though it never really felt like it felt like the game was the Fire's, I think throughout, if the Fire didn't get that goal from Bamba in the first half, right, and it goes into the locker room tied 0-0, I think that there's a realistic possibility that it could have been a different game. Charlotte comes out at home with some intensity early in the second half. They get a lead, the Fire chasing the game, and it's just a different place. You can storyline out how easily it could have been a different situation. But I think that you're right. Like it's Berhalter ball coming together. And I think that part of what we're seeing is just growth from a lot of players into that system, which is comfort in the system. And also, I think, coaching where people feel like they know what they need to do to improve because they know it's being asked of them. I talked about Guti getting back on defense for it. He's been doing some of it more and more, but seeing all of it in one game, I think was really refreshing. I mean, he had blocks, clearances, like he had more of his touches in the defensive half than he did in the offensive half. And a lot of them, I'm not saying like he was, starting a pass as a midfielder from the center circle. He was taking the ball from a center back, close to like 18, 20 yards out and helping the Fire build out of a difficult moment in transition, right? Stuff like that, as well as the pure defensive stuff, which is refreshing to see. And I think Jonathan Dean had a very good game defensively, right? Like he limited Zaha to one shot from distance off a corner that was ultimately blocked. Zaha was visibly frustrated. Joe Lowry from Backheeled posted a clip on socials of, Zaha like I think early in the second half, just like throwing his arms up in frustration, like, what are we even doing here? Because there's a pass that's like slightly misplayed that he probably, if we're being honest, could have found a way to connect with if he has the ability to run, which maybe is an open question for some people in Charlotte right now. But more than just the defensive stuff, like Dean was, he didn't have any like tremendous offensive moments, but he was getting into spaces where he was a good pass option on that right side in the attack. Like in the 57th minute, there's one point where he's just like literally like waving his hands, being like, guys, I'm open, guys, I'm open. Nobody seems to want to pass to him, which is, honestly, maybe a little bit of a communication issue, and they weren't expecting him to be doing that as effectively as he was. Has kind of like a cheeky look on goal where he does that like kind of in the air heels click, trying to get a goal thing in the 66th minute or 67th minute. But he was playing more into that wingback role than I would have thought he would have done. And even without Tim Ream, right? Like it's still a very good Charlotte defense on paper. And they made them look lower than average over the course of 90 minutes.
Look, I think there's kind of a few points I want to kind of respond to what you said, or add on, I should say, is maybe the better way of phrasing it. Like, one, in terms of Kalina, to go all the way back, I saw a stat coming into this game that was like, he had a 74% save percentage last year. He's coming into Saturday, he was at 88%.
It wasn't coming into Saturday. That was a couple weeks old. That was, I think I may have sent that to you. That was from like April 22nd or so.
Okay.
And then that coincided with the change in form from Charlotte, right? Where they stopped getting those wins.
Gotcha. Yeah. To the end, I think the point may stand either way. Like, part of me wonders, like, how much of that is he's getting the opportunity to stop balls, right? I think this defense is not quite what people think it is. And we've seen that the last few weeks that they've played. I think the Charlotte team got a lot of hype and maybe is now showing that they are not quite lived up to that. On the Brian Gutierrez aspect, 100% agree. It was super exciting to see him play. We'll talk about him, I think, a little more here shortly, because there's been a little bit of conversation about his future. Wonderful to see him. I think we're seeing kind of what, interestingly enough, that connection of Mauricio Pineda and Sergio Orejel brings out of him, which is three guys who can play some really wonderful passes, be very strong on the ball, and maintain possession well, right? I think in a way they almost feel redundant against each other, but they play off each other so well, because any three of those guys can move into the final third and play the final ball. They can start the transition, and they can also be that kind of connector, moving out to the wings, moving up to the forwards. So I think it puts him in a really awesome position and really allows Philip Zinkernagel, Jonathan Bamba to play their individual games in the way that you would want them to. I think that goal for Bamba was huge. He's been a little, you can tell, frustrated by his inability to win one-on-ones. So to be able to find space, get the shot off, and convert it, I think will be huge. And to Jonathan Dean,
and that just like that, how good that goal was, right? It was it was a very low percentage shot, and he hit it a beautiful curling ball that, like, I think all of us were like, that had to be deflected, right? Nope, it's just is. We found someone that can bend it almost like Beckham.
Yeah, no, he's and you find him that confidence, and you continue to create space for him. He's going to have more of those, right? In the same way that Philip Zinkernagel has found space because of the gravity of Brian Gutierrez and Hugo Kuipers and Jonathan Bamba. To Jonathan Dean, like, I would truly say, like, if you look back at his time at Birmingham Legion, which is where he came from in the USL Championship, he did play more forward. He did play a little bit more of a wingback role. It was not like uncommon for him to be forward. So I've always felt like maybe he has that in his arsenal. Maybe it's not at this level, but I do wonder how much of, frankly, the Klopas system was just hang back. And now, as he has more time to get comfortable, you never know. Maybe we'll see a new dimension to his game. But if nothing else, it was great to see him back in stride defensively.
Yeah. And I mean, we mentioned his return's not imminent, I don't think, but Leonardo Barroso, being on the horizon, is probably the guy that you'd still pencil in as the starter. It isn't bad to have a guy that can be a like-for-like substitution off the bench, or a guy that can come in if somebody's not available because of an injury or a suspension or whatever, but also just, more competition at those spots where, Barroso's young, and there will be ups and downs, as there are with all young players. He's learning the league, he's learning the language, he's going to have to do more adaptation a little bit later in the process to like the travel and everything else. And so it's not bad that Dean is giving, potentially the coaching staff a little bit of something to think about, of like, Barroso had a rough game. Do we want to like give him some time to settle and, make this a Jonathan Dean start again?
And he can also play on the left, I think is important to think about too, right? We mentioned Chase Gasper is finally kind of back in training with the team. Nothing against Chase Gasper, but with the emergence of Amari Glasgow as potentially another player at right back, and we know Marin Haile Selassie can even play there in a pinch. Just in terms of a roster building perspective, do you need 5 guys who can play fullback with the emergency 6th on the roster? Maybe not. This team's already essentially been living without Chase Gasper since they signed him. So the question is kind of, where does that role go, right? So if you have one guy who can truly be a swing and then another guy to fill in the gap when you need to, I think that can certainly go a long way. Well,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we'll move a little bit more specifically to Brian Gutierrez. And I wanted to put this in because we haven't really talked about it. We've seen some reports bubble up. So obviously, Tim, if you have any actual news to report, you're welcome to do so. But otherwise, we can just talk hypothetically about this. That being, there have been some rumors around Brian Gutierrez moving to AS Roma, potentially as soon as the summer. It creates kind of a few interesting opportunities to talk about. One, of course, just Gutierrez, Brian's development, his role, what his future looks like, not only for the Fire, but also for the men's national team, where he's been a recent call-up, potentially also getting included this summer if he's in good enough form, but also where that leaves the Fire kind of for the rest of the season, right? I doubt this would be a Gaga Slonina loan back situation. I would imagine they'd want him ready for the beginning of the season in this scenario. So I'll kind of punt to you, Tim, in terms of your thoughts on what that move could, or what a move could look like in the summer, both for Guti and for the Fire.
So first things first, by the time that this episode comes out, there's a very good chance, listeners, that you will know whether or not Brian Gutierrez was selected for, it's a joint roster for the Gold Cup as well as 2 friendlies, which I think is a little bit of an interesting choice, right? Because I could see an argument that there should be a bigger camp, and you could maybe bring in some guys for the friendlies, give them some time with the team, and then leave the tournament to, maybe some other players that are more established, or for that matter, just have more people in and cut some people and send them back to their teams. But it's going to be both. That should be coming out Monday. CONCACAF does stuff on CONCACAF time. So I'm going to say sometime from the morning to the afternoon, but I'd probably bet early to mid-afternoon. And so there's a good chance when this is out, we'll know if Brian Gutierrez was selected or not. If he is, I think that helps the process of him moving. If that's what is going to happen, it makes him more visible. It can help him, depending on what country we're talking about, get a visa a little bit easier, stuff like that. Because national team appearances can matter for those things, especially in England. And he's previously been linked with, teams in Mexico. The Fire turned down an offer last year for well into the 7 figures for Brian Gutierrez, as well as some big clubs. There was a Man United link at one point. It seems like if he's going to move, this year would probably be a pretty good time for it to happen. Not that the window closes for him after this year at 21 years old, but just the further he gets into his 20s, the less likely it is. And the more likely, if he does move to somewhere in Europe, it would be to sort of one of the clubs that is maybe not as exciting and maybe not a destination to being a bigger club. Alex Calabrese, by the way, wrote an article on MinRed97.com about this last week. That's the first time that we had a reporting that that Brian Gutierrez confirmed that he believes he's committed to the U.S. men's national team, even though he's not technically cap tied. So yeah, I recommend you read that. It's an exciting summer for him. I don't have a magic prognostication on whether the chances are higher that he goes or stays. I would say the Fire will not get in the way of a good offer if they think it's an offer that's probably at least what they'd be able to get from him next year with another year in the system and growing and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point, it does seem to be a little bit of the time, right? You're seeing his best club performances. Maybe, since he was playing alongside John Duran, I don't think that's unreasonable to say. He's finally getting his USMNT call-ups. You would hope to have one more here. I think his form probably warrants it. I think based on the way Mauricio Pochettino selects, I don't think having a great game right before the lineups are due or the rosters are due is going to hurt him. And then I think from the Fire's perspective, I think that is where I start to kind of hold my breath a little bit, because we like Sergio Orahel a lot. We think Mauricio Pineda has played well. We think Romani Kwame could be very good. But that would leave a pretty big hole on a roster where you are not exactly able to plug in a lot of holes. Obviously this is the more primary window for the rest of the world, right?
How big a hole are you talking about? Are you thinking it's like a hole that's like bigger than a bread box? Maybe, I don't know, roughly the size of Kevin De Bruyne? What size?
Well,
what size are you thinking?
They may both be in Italy by the time we find out some news here, Tim.
That's definitely true, and that's the other update. Like, because that was one of the questions with the links to Kevin De Bruyne earlier. Was okay, that's great. He's a great guy, like great player. Could kill it in MLS. Like, where does he go? Realizing that he's probably a better player than Brian Gutierrez, but also decade plus older than Brian Gutierrez, and Gutierrez is a fan favorite. He's a homegrown. You want to see him continue to grow, preferably in Chicago for as long as you can keep him. And like, how did that all fit together? And the answer is maybe that's how, and that it doesn't. So, I think that's a question. Now, obviously, if he goes, right, like the Fire have been planning on a number of different designated players in different positions, as well as I know they've got a board that has like a number of potential targets for basically every position on the field, right? Like if this guy comes available and this is the situation we're in, these are the names we're going to go after. And I think that any move would have to be with an eye towards performance for this year, right? Like I don't think that they would say no to a life-changing move to a player just categorically, right? Because I think that Greg Berhalter and Greg Rotten as well, with his experience developing players, kind of know that it's really about being the kind of team that supports players getting what they want, and that ends up paying off in the long run, even if you lose something with an individual player. But this is a special year, being that it's the first year under this group, like the first sporting regime with Greg Berhalter coming in, and how long it's been since the Fire have made the postseason, and it feels like it is a need this year more than a want to take that next step forward. So I think that if Brian Gutierrez does go, it would be at the same time the Fire could replace him. And they would probably have a extremely high degree of confidence that a replacement, that they knew exactly who they were going to replace him with before he was allowed to depart.
Yeah, I think to your point before, you would expect, obviously nothing is solid and final in terms of Kevin De Bruyne. I haven't seen any reports that indicate otherwise. You would expect, right, it would be that kind of guy. It would be a creative midfielder who you can just slot right in and can kind of take over that role, potentially for now at a higher level, right? Obviously not with the same kind of shelf life, but you would imagine a guy in that vein. So it's a little bit of a wait and see, right? You never know. Maybe it is they wait until the winter because he wants to finish out the year and they want him to finish out the year. But I would imagine if somebody knocks on your door and says, hey, I'll give you $10 million for Brian Gutierrez, plus a little bit of a fee when he moves on, you're not going to turn that away. And I think they even showed that this winter with some of the moves that they made, moving on from Federico Navarro, for instance, right? A guy who we all agreed, I think, could have played an interesting role for Greg Berhalter, but they chose to let him go.
Yeah, and they chose to let him go partly because it was a unique opportunity for him. Fetty had a kid not long before, so very young kids. His wife had completed her master's in Chicago, so like that phase of her professional development was done, and they managed to get an offer from a club that is like literally like almost dead center halfway between where Navarro's family is and his wife's family is. So lots of family being able to come and support them when they've got young kids and stuff. So like it was just something that worked out. And I think that those are the kinds of values that you want to see the team continue to show. And in terms of De Bruyne, the only thing recently he said on May 17th that he said maybe when he was asked if he could go to another Premier League club, and what he said was, I want to play good football. I have a family, I have young kids, and I have to make a decision that suits all of us, right? Now that probably, if Napoli is a serious option and the reports are accurate, that may push Napoli above Chicago, no matter what money the Fire could offer, because I believe that he already owns a house there. They've spent time there in the past. That familiarity, being close to family in Europe and stuff, may push them over, or they could convince them that the life that you'd have as a soccer player in this country is more family friendly than it would be in Europe, and it's a great place for him and his family to come over and have a lifestyle that you can't necessarily have being a footballer in Europe. And I think that that's something that Bossi's talked a lot about, and maybe the team recruits him as an ambassador to talk to De Bruyne about his experiences coming over from the pinnacle of the European game. I mean, spending a little bit of time at the other club in Manchester, so can make that comparison a little bit. I don't know. I think again, it's a lot of what ifs, and I think that it's Kevin De Bruyne is not the only capable number 10 in the league. The other possibility, of course, like you talked about, like the play of Martin Haile Selassie, how good he's been. I think that Zinkernagel was brought in partly because of his versatility. I don't think that was the primary reason he was brought in, but he has played as a 10 in the past at a fairly high level. He obviously hasn't played there under Berhalter this year. I think that if I was surprised when Guti was injured and out with the national team before that we didn't see Zinkernagel in that role. I think there's a number of other midfielders. It wouldn't surprise me that much if the tactics switch a little bit, if it's a long-term thing and we see the team playing with more of a 10 that's a little bit more advanced than what Guti's been doing. And Zinkernagel would have the ability to do that and still do the Zinkernagel things that we've seen. But then that opens up spot for another attacking player of whom the Fire have a number that are just making a case for more minutes.
Yeah. And I think, last thing, and then we'll kind of move on. But I think that to me is where I might disagree slightly. And I think that actually, if this is a more permanent move and Brian Gutierrez is moving on, you actually kind of change your target ideas, right? And obviously Kevin De Bruyne is Kevin De Bruyne because he's Kevin De Bruyne, right? There's a celebrity status to that as well. But outside
your logic
of that
is impeccable.
Yeah. But outside of that realm, do you look at somebody who's maybe more traditional 8, right? Not world class if you can get it, right? But a high level midfielder who has some creative spark to him, as opposed to a guy who is truly just an attacking midfielder. And I don't mean to say just, because we saw what Ricky Puig means to LA Galaxy, right? But I don't know that that's quite the system that Greg seems to be keen on playing here, especially with how impactful Andrew Gutman and when he was healthy, Leonardo Barroso, and even when he wasn't, like Jonathan Dean and Omar Glasgow have been in the attack. I think you need a little stronger defensive presence from the midfield than to just start playing a 10.
Yeah, that's fair. I think at the same time, I think that what Guti does that is so special is his ability in the attack and the defensive stuff. I just said how impressed I was by this performance. He's still not going to win any awards as a defensive midfielder anywhere.
Oh,
and I think that that's losing his ability going forward and his ability to be a creative force and just knowing the right moments to push higher up the pitch and connect, which is how he has the goals that he's got this year, is what the Fire would be losing if he moves on. But that's still an if. And I mean, again, it wouldn't surprise me if really the move happened maybe in the winter. More likely, I think, would be next summer than this summer. But, I think it really is going to depend. And it's not, again, just not based on one performance, but a call up to the national team would be huge. Performing well in those tournaments in the summer could push him higher on some teams' plans. So a lot of moving pieces.
Absolutely. And now we will move on to what is, I'm sure, at the top of everybody's mind, which is the game we have in 2 days, right? And that is Chicago Fire heading out to Rhode Island. You heard it right, folks. Rhode Island for some reason.
Which is still in New England. It's
yes.
Like 2.5 hours or whatever it is from Boston, but it's still technically in New England. So,
well, Foxborough isn't that close to Boston either, right? It's at least 45. Shout out NFL stadiums. But anyway, Chicago Fire head out to Rhode Island to take on New England Revolution in the next round of the Open Cup. This is round of 16. New England comes in on a bit of a hot streak. Some may say they are due for a loss or a beatdown, perhaps. They're unbeaten in 7 across all competitions. That's 5 W's and 2 draws, in their last 2 games. They were 0-0 against San Jose in the Arena Bowl last night. Tim might as well put a trademark on that one because he loves it so much.
I know it's not good, but it's so bad that I love it.
No, I think it's great.
Especially things like the teams basically swapped rosters, right? Like that's the funny thing.
You're not wrong, actually, the more you say that. But just for your own sake, if you're a Fire or for some reason a New England Revolution fan, wondering where you can find it, should be Paramount Plus and Golazo, Tuesday, May 20th, 6:30 p.m. Central Time. We made a comment beforehand, oh man, haven't we played the Revolution this year? And the answer was no, but it just feels like one of those games where, gosh, I feel like we've seen them a couple times. A little bit of a new look, started rough this year, been on the hot streak, like we mentioned. Tim, what do you expect to see out of New England just from a tactical, game state kind of side of things?
Yeah, so one of the big things that they did after not getting results, I think they only had one win in their first 6 games. And then they had a 1-0 win against Atlanta. So again, we just saw Atlanta. We kind of know that Atlanta are not at the time, it was still early enough in the season. It was like, oh wow, they beat Atlanta. Like that's a good team, because everyone was still telling themselves that a team that spent $45 million in the transfer window in the past year had to be a good team. And then it turns out that's really not the case. But they switched from playing kind of like a 4-2-3-1 that was sort of almost like a 4-4-2 at some points, into kind of more of like a 3-5-2, 3-1-4-2 system. And that has made a very big difference, I think, in the way that they played. And, Carles Heel has been, I think, a little bit closer to the Carles Heel that we remember, rather than as completely anonymous as he had become.
He's been Carles.
And yeah, and that's been a big difference, right? Now, again, they allowed Orlando City to get 3 goals, and Orlando had been on a goalless streak for ages. And so that's not great. And I mean, that's, again, it's the same Orlando team. The Fire played down a man and held 0-0 because Orlando's attack is not what we thought it would be this year. And the Earthquake, I mean, I didn't know that that these two teams had a 0-0 draw in them. I guess I'm a little bit less surprised by the Revs, because I think they had one their first game of the season, I want to say, against Nashville. But I thought the San Jose Earthquakes were going to win 5-0 and lose 5-0 and basically nothing in between with the way that Arena's had the team play. But it was a 0-0 draw that had basically nothing going for it. The Revs, like the Fire, were not one of the teams that played midweek also. So that's, not an excuse for the lack of production there, which I've seen bandied around from some people of why there weren't as many goals in the past weekend. So, I honestly don't know what to expect. I also don't know how much Caleb Porter is going to put his starting 11 out there. I mean, kind of like the Fire, he didn't really hold back anyone from this match very much. But unlike the Fire, I think that he doesn't really have as good of options on the bench as the Fire have had.
Yeah, I think to just kind of piece by piece, right? Your first point, Carles Heel has been Carles Heel this year, right? He is more than half of New England's goals, and he has a third of their assists. He leads the team in both. He's the only player on the squad that has multiple assists, and the only player, I think, with more than 2 goals, and he has 6. So from that perspective, right, we talked a little bit last week about what really bothers the Fire. What really bothers the Fire are really 2 things, right? One, to me, is the freak athlete center forward. We saw Patrick Ogyman get a goal last night. We've seen that throughout the year. Kevin Denke, Christian Benteke. That seems to be something that they can't really compete with, just because we don't have the physicality up front when Carlos Terán is not playing, which he tends to not do, right? And the other thing, I would honestly just say Hani Mukhtar, right? I don't even want to say Hani Mukhtar types, because it really just seems to be Hani Mukhtar. And while Carles Heel, obviously a wonderful player, really great set piece delivery, the Fire do not worry me from a set piece standpoint the way they did last year. Jack Elliott seems to have brought a lot. Hugo Kuiper's defensive production has brought a lot in that respect as well. So in that sense, it's going to depend, like you said, on the starting 11. I do expect to see most of the main guys that you would think. I would expect maybe Marin to start and Zink off the bench, but I would expect to see Hugo. I would expect to see Jack Elliott and Sam Rogers, probably Omari Glasgow instead of Jonathan Dean. But for the most part, this is a game that, just based on the matchups, the Fire should have the advantage, right? Leonardo Campana, who is a wonderful player, is not the profile that I think would give this team troubles.
And I believe he left. I believe he left the match against San Jose with an injury.
I didn't see that. So
yeah,
that would be. I'd have to look at their bench, but still.
So yeah, I mean, and that would further reduce their, again, because they don't have the depth of attacking talent that the Fire have had. And I think that that's going to potentially be a big difference maker in this one. I think the other thing to think, going back to what we talked about with the Fire's recent performances, I think they've legitimately figured things out defensively. I don't think it just is a question of luck or streaks. Not that it's going to be perfect. And like there were certainly more than a couple of things that I think that Berhalter and his staff are going to have good game tape on to have some not super fun conversations with some of the players. But I think that the Fire really figured out how to not make as many kind of like yakety sax level comedy defensive errors as we've seen from this team over the past few years, and it was as we saw at the beginning of this season. And if that's the case, they just become a different caliber team than they were. I mean, basically in the game against Nashville, right? And you know what you said about set pieces, I think is prescient because this is there must be a winner kind of game. They go to extra time if there's not a winner after 90 minutes, and if there's not a winner after that, it goes to just like the random lottery that is penalty kicks. Almost, not that it's quite that, but still, it's close. And I think the Fire are much more likely. The fact that the Fire are much more likely to be able to score off a set piece, I think, is a huge advantage than concede off a set piece. I mean, especially if the game is wearing on and you need a goal when there's tired legs and stuff like that on the pitch, having that like minute or so to breathe, not having to run around to start setting things up, and then just needing 30 seconds of speed to get to the back of the net can be huge.
And I think I was going to mention this, I think either way, but I set it up perfectly there, right? This is where I think Romani Kwame is a guy who's going to potentially break the game in that respect, right? Like I wouldn't be shocked to see the standard starting three, right, of Orahel, Gutierrez, and Pineda, and then maybe like right at the 55 or maybe even at halftime, you bring on Kwame for one of those three. And we know what he brings in a defensive standpoint, but we saw against Vancouver, right? He is a guy who can give you that burst of physicality, win the ball, and move into the final third. That you've Marin potentially coming off the bench, Omari Glasgow potentially coming off the bench. I don't like saying this, but this feels like a game you win, right? It feels like a matchup that just favors the Fire. And to that end, right? Even when we look at Atlanta, and we've talked a lot about how Atlanta is not who we thought they were. I still think Emmanuel Latte-Lath is a wonderful player. 5'10", right? This is not like and please tell me if I'm harping on this too much, but like you need a physical presence to be able to beat these center backs. And when you don't have that, it can be very difficult to do.
John, just tell me you watched the Champo without telling me you watched the Champo.
I was terrified when I found out Emmanuel Latte-Lath was coming to MLS. If you guys don't know, big Queens Park Rangers supporters, and he tortured me 4 years with Middlesbrough. Excuse me, sorry, Austin. So yeah, but that's life.
So yeah, I think that's a fair way of putting it. I honestly would expect to see a little bit more rotation than that. Kwame did make an appearance, but not until very late against Charlotte. I think that was partly with an eye to keeping him fairly fresh. I wouldn't be at all surprised if we see Kwame starting. I wouldn't be at all surprised if we maybe saw, say, Omari Glasgow back in the 11. It wouldn't surprise me if it was Dean at the same time. But I feel like Kwame is the most likely singular change, although I think that we'll see at least 2 or 3 changes. I think the other thing that I'd be kind of interested in just thinking about a little bit is like, is this a game that you put in Kellyn Acosta to see if he still has more of what I think we all expected from him at the beginning of the season? Because we haven't seen appearances from him at all in a while. And, I think it will be an interesting opportunity for him. He played and went 90, I believe, against Detroit City. That's obviously a different kind of opponent. He didn't look great in that match. We talked about that then. I think that this is another opportunity where if he can have a good performance against the Revs, that maybe changes his mindset a little bit and maybe helps him help the team more going forward.
Tim, I think the only place I would push back on anything you said was, and again, I love Kellyn Acosta. I wonder if this game is too important, right? Like I said earlier in the year, I think they want to win. I think they want to get to the final, right? I think they want to make a deep, deep run in the U.S. Open Cup, and 2 games is not a deep run. So can you candidly risk starting Kellyn Acosta over Romani Kwame, over I'm trying to even think off the top of my head. Jay Davila, who wasn't poor last night, is seeming to grow into his role. Over potentially even, God love him, a Sam Williams, who I think I wouldn't pick long term over Kellen Acosta, but this year it's hard to say he hasn't been better.
And I think that's
on the value
right. And the only reason that I said that is I think that you're right. I think that Berhalter is going to field the team that he thinks is going to win, and he's not going to care about Sunday. The Fire having an extra day to recover after this, I think, is helpful. Not going to really worry too much about Sunday. I think he's going to try to win this game, and that's going to be that. He sees what he sees in training, and I think that he also knows that he has to have opportunities for players to work their way into minutes and into the 11, and that's why. But I mean, if he's not seeing it in training, then I think if we don't see an appearance from Kellen Acosta at all, I think in this one, I think that's the time that maybe alarm bells need to start going off on the Kellen Acosta watch of like, is he something where is there a situation where the Fire just try to move on from him, even if it means eating some salary in the summer window?
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. Well, that is probably as good of a place as we have to wrap things up here. Thank you so much again for joining us. As always, please stay tuned to wherever you're getting this podcast, whether it is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. If you could subscribe, give us a follow, give it a like, or if you're on Apple Podcasts, give it a rate, 5 stars, preferably. And also give it a share, all that kind of good stuff, all that helps grow the podcast, grow the sport, all that kind of good stuff. Share it with folks in your life, or just post it on Twitter. That would always go a long way as well. Speaking of which, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram. I don't know about Facebook, to be honest. I got to ask about that one. But Twitter and Instagram,
have one. We don't really use it. Yeah. Blue Sky, Instagram, all those places are better. Yep.
Yeah. Tim's the only one here that's like an old man. I'm just kidding, Tim. I know you're not old man.
I'm not old enough to be using Facebook.
There we go. But anywho, Twitter and Instagram, Men in Red 97 and MIR 97 Pods is where you can keep up with all the info. Of course, we'll have another episode of Hot Takes Live out at the end of this month. You'll see a little bit more info on that coming soon. And then, as always, stay tuned to the website, meninred97.com. You can find wonderful reporting from Tim, Alex, Max. That's where you'll find the previews of the games, Tim's big 5 takeaways after the game, or 5 things we learned, after the game, and where you'll find all the latest news, roster info, all that kind of good stuff as players start to work their way back. And as we get closer to summer, how players start to work their way out. And of course, thank you for being here. It's always wonderful to have you around the bonfire. We appreciate you listening. For Tim, for DJ, for Austin, our wonderful producer who makes us sound good and gives you the catchy beat that'll probably start playing right about now. Thank you for joining us around the bonfire, and come on, you Men in Red.